Hello again. So I just finished watching the Ken Burns documentary on the Vietnam War on Netflix. I thought it was really interesting. Now I already know a lot of the history and a lot about history in general, and I do know a lot about the Vietnam War, but I learned so much about in this extensive 10-part documentary. The veterans who fought in the war are not really that old compared to the ones that fought in World War II. And hearing them interviewed was really revelatory. They talked about their experience either getting drafted or signing up for the military, what they expected the war to be and what it actually was. Many thought the war would be a little bit simpler, a little bit clearer than what it ended up being. I never knew John F. Kennedy was such a large part in getting the war started in the first place. Before this documentary, I thought it was more Lyndon Johnson's war. But no, Kennedy was the one that sowed the seeds for war. Kennedy actually got us in there for real. With that said, I still think Kennedy was an excellent president. He solved the Cuban Missile Crisis perfectly. He inspired the whole country with his speeches, and he helped win the space race. He could have done more if he had more time, but that's okay. But seriously, the Kennedy administration getting involved in Vietnam was unacceptable. I almost want to blame Kennedy more than Johnson because Kennedy was supposed to be an expert on geopolitics. Johnson was cared more about domestic issues like the civil rights and the war on poverty, which were extremely important, obviously. And Johnson did an atrocious job bringing us into Vietnam. Domestically, Johnson was one of the greatest presidents ever, and foreign affairs, Johnson was one of the worst presidents ever. Kennedy and Johnson were trying to be tough guys on communism. They were obviously wrong concerning the domino effect, but this was the whole American exceptional thing we still debate to this day. America is not as invincible as some Americans think we are. We can be easily beaten in a war depending on the adversary. Every time we bombed a village in Vietnam, for every one person we killed, 10 more people would join the North Vietnamese army. They hated us because we destroyed everything they had. Sure, we built bridges and roads and buildings, but that didn't nearly make up for all the damage and murder we committed. It is despicable the number of both innocent civilians it is despicable the number of innocent civilians that died. It is despicable the number of combat soldiers that died on both sides. One of the things I was looking for in this documentary was an answer to the Republican claim we could have won the Vietnam War if we tried harder or do something differently or stayed longer. After watching that 10-part documentary, I have no idea what they are talking about. I don't see any combat strategies that could have gotten us to win. The bombing was completely ineffective because it was indiscriminate killing. It's not like we had drones hunting them down individual targets like we had today. No, it was napalm. It was Agent Orange. Yes, we focused on military targets like factories and bases, but because there is so much civilian death, they would never have allowed us to win that war. The family members of the deceased would have fought us for decades there. The recruits were growing the more we killed them. You can't just go into a country and say, no, you can't have communism. You have to accept capitalism and democracy. They can develop those things over time on their own, but you can't force a country to accept Western values. That's absurd. I mean, the South Vietnamese government wasn't a democracy either. It was completely corrupt. It was a puppet government. It was martial law. We installed horrible leaders in South Vietnam. I don't know what it's like to fight in a war, or even be in the military, but I thought the whole descriptions of warfare by the servicemen and servicewomen was really interesting. I appreciate their service. Nearly every time I see someone wearing a veteran's hat, I thank them for their service. To be really honest, I'm happy I wasn't part of that generation. I'm happy I was born many years after that war ended. After the Iraq War, it looks like we haven't learned our lesson, but maybe someday we will live in a more peaceful world. I'm pretty close to a pacifist. I don't believe wars are usually necessary. I mean, if Putin invaded Germany, then yes, I'd say, yes, let's go to war. But other than that, I think the rest of the world can take care of itself. We can still donate money and assistance to helping developing nations, but I don't believe in the whole let's support the better dictator to get favorable results. No, I don't think. No, I think we have a lot to learn from Vietnam, and at the very least, it's an educational experience. We learned about the limits of U.S. power and how we can't solve every problem in the world. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.